in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA and Vice Chair of the New Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today, Friday, October 16th, we will hear the presentation, APA's new Aging in Community Programs. For technical help during today's webcast, type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call the 1-800 number shown in bold. For content questions related to the presentation, type those in the questions box, also located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. And if possible, please indicate which speaker the question goes to. And we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2015. Thanks to all of the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Private Practice Division. To learn more about all of our divisions, visit planning.org/divisions, and to learn about our chapters, planning.org/chapters. On your screen is a list of upcoming webcasts. To register for these webcasts, visit our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, visit planning.org, go to your dashboard and select activities by provider. That's the easiest way. And then select today's sponsor. Again, that's the Private Practice Division. And then you can select today's topic. And this webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. Some of the recorded webcasts are available for distance education CM credit. And for availability of that, again, just visit our webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our upcoming sessions. We are recording today's webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube or visit youtube.com/planningwebcast. And a PDF of the presentation will also be made available after the session ends, again, on our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Before I turn it over to Ramona Malahi from the Private Practice Division, the speakers have asked that I conduct a few polls just to kind of get a general idea of who's on our call. So I'm going to go ahead and start that now. The first question, just to know, is what sector do you work in? Public, private, nonprofit, other? So I'm going to go ahead and load that up. Perfect. I think it's on the screen. So if everyone can go ahead and answer that for me. And again, not in the questions box, but you should see a poll up on your screen, so you can just click right on that screen. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and close it, and then I'll show those results. So it looks like 61% public is the majority and 30% private. Okay, and we have one more poll, and this one is related more closely to the topic. Okay, here we go. Are you currently planning for the aging population in your community? And I apologize, it looks like I have a little bit of a typo. So yes, no, at the beginning stages, talking about it, or don't know, and just kind of want to learn a little bit more about it. So go ahead and take that poll for me. We'll wait just a moment, and then I'll show those results as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it, and then I'll share those results with everyone. So it looks like 22% yes, 33% no, 31% at the beginning stages, we're talking about it in our communities, and 14% is don't know. Okay, well, that's great. Okay, so now I'm going to turn the screen over to Ramona Malahi of the Private Practice Division, who's going to kick us off and get us started. Ramona.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks very much, Chris. I really appreciate it. I just a little background. I've been with APA for the longest time. It seems like aeons, and I'm the pastor of the Private Practice Division. I really want to welcome you to this conversation around aging. It's an area of great interest, and we've been involved with this for several years. So today's agenda, we're going to look a little at the aging phenomenon. We're going to look at the APA's toolkit on aging, since planners are positioned really to make a great deal of impact in regards to the way people age. We're also going to have Brad talk about the PAS report, which is a tremendous primer and guide. And then we have the on-the-ground Connecticut's livability strategy shared by Alyssa that I think is going to just amaze you, and followed by Q&A. So we all hear the statistics in regards to aging. We do know that it's not a phenomenon of just the United States, but it's a global phenomenon, something that obviously we've never experienced before. And we're looking at numbers, or we hear numbers that in 2009, 4 countries had populations of 20% or more, 65 and older, and that by 2050, we were looking at more than 100 having similar type of population. So our population is getting older. There's facts all over the place. The most familiar one I think that we see for America, of course, is 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 daily. We can see that there's going to be 1 billion in terms of senior population worldwide, that we will see 483 of them being considered seniors in regards to 65 and older. So I mean, so we see an older population. For America, for the United States, there's some interest in regards to the additional look in regards to demographic transformation. What I want to point out is that even though the population will become anywhere between estimated 72 to 75 million people that'll be over the age 65, at the same time, there are going to be roughly 80 million that are going to be children and youth ages 17 and below. And then the other key demographic transformation is that there's going to be a tremendous amount of diversity, that by 2042, more than half of the nation will be considered people of color. So the social demographic, the social dynamics are huge. So we talk about longevity. People are living longer thanks to medicine, thanks to our ability to live well, eat good food, exercise. We are living longer. Now, there's been some surveys on aging that have been done for the past 4 or 5 years by United Healthcare, along with the International City County Management Association, and it's to get a feel for what baby boomers or what seniors are feeling. For the most part, they feel fairly good that they're aging in place, that they're doing well. In 2015, the difference is that they actually did a survey on professionals, and there was a difference in regards to how people were aging well, but the issues are basically financing and health. We see in regards to a whole industry out there building for aging in place. We get things in the mail. After we hit 50, we get an AARP invitation. So we do know that there is a whole infrastructure outside available to help you to age in place. and that is really in regards to mobility, tools, and the adaptation of new technologies. So what we do know is that aging is really both personal and has public impacts. For personally, you're taking a look at retirement. You're taking a look at remaining healthy and exercising. You're taking a look at how to modify your home if you're going to age in place. But at the same time, the public perspective is that it's impacting transportation and housing choices. It'll impact the economy. It'll definitely impact both the finances of the individual as well as the finances of the community. So this represents that APA has been involved in taking a look at how to position planners so that they're better able to address an aging population. And it goes all the way back to the first PAS report by Jerome Kaufman back in 1961. And Jerome, a visionary planner as we all know, really took a look at issues like livability, housing location next to services, land use decisions, and how does it incorporate an aging population, the impacts to economy and transportation. So overall, these issues, as you are familiar, have not really changed today. So Jerome comes to the conclusion that what we really need to do is to start taking a look at how to incorporate an aging population in our planning, and really take a look at how we as communities are going to be defining livability, and also get a better understanding of how aging will impact our community. So that PAS report was followed by a report done by Deborah Howe and company on aging aging in place, and it really took a look at more of the health issues. What happens in terms of the impacts of aging physically to a person, and some of the issues and challenges that they face. So what we see out of this discussion in this time period is really some some programs coming like federal government and the state government to really take a look at addressing some of the needs. So probably more silo-oriented, taking a look at transportation, the older driver, EPA with its growing smarter, living healthier, smart growth and active aging booklet, taking a look in regards to like USDA, healthy eating, and home modification. So in place, we can see that there are some relevant planning paradigms that really fit well in regards to an inclusion of an aging perspective. They're smart growth, new urbanism, transit-oriented development, safe routes to school, complete streets, sustainable community planning, active living. All these planning paradigms have an opportunity for you to broaden the horizon in regards to planning across all ages. So at the same time, there are also what we call aging-oriented planning approaches. Elderly-friendly approaches, aging-friendly, whether you call it communities for all ages, aging in place, community certification, life cycle communities. In my work capacity, working with the Department of Housing and Urban Development in Hawaii, we have been involved with the development of the City and County of Honolulu's action plan for an age-friendly city. And this is part of the World Health Organization, and in the United States, the affiliate is AARP. So all these efforts are trying to see how can we focus our planning concerns, issues, our regulations, our zoning, our policies on addressing aging. Now, we're familiar with the concept of aging in place, which is really the ability to live in one's home and community safely. So it's more personal driven. It's you. It addresses the individual. It's taking a look at how you can age in place in your home, how you can adapt the technologies, how you can do home modification, add grab bars, taking a look at universal design and visitability, keeping your house all on one floor, and trying to address the issue of aging, of having a home that addresses your full lifespan. So what has happened is a movement towards taking a look at aging in community, taking a look at addressing aging in regards to a whole community effort, coming from a more asset-based kind of approach. All these surveys that were done on seniors, there are also a couple surveys that was done on communities and how prepared they were for an aging demographic. And the most recent survey was done by Metlife along with APA and a number of other partners. And what it revealed, so two surveys were done, 2005 and 2010. And what 2010 survey revealed is that although there are more services focused, there was better transportation opportunities, overall in regards to a more cohesive, a comprehensive planning perspective, not much had occurred across the United States. And partly was the financial debacle that we all experienced in our communities to various degrees in 2007 and 2008. So Asian community thus becomes a much better perspective, because rather than focusing on the individual, it's really taking a look at the community structures as a whole. Now, what exactly does the APA, American Planning Association's toolkit involve? Well, one of the tools is the perspective and multi-generational planning. And multi-generational planning really comes from the perspective that children and seniors have common needs, especially as it addresses the built environment and inclusive design. And that the combined goal is really to look at creating this common vision and being able to leverage and optimize community resources. So if you go to this website, you'll get a web link. You'll get some ideas in regards to multi-generational planning as it's tied in to smart growth, and it's extremely useful. The second tool is on the radar. So divisions, as you know, APA divisions are really affiliate groups targeting various focuses in regards to planning, like we have the transportation division, we have the housing division, and of course this session is being brought to you by the private practice division. Well, one of the things that have evolved from that is identifying some emergent issues in the community and having the expertise and experience and knowledge of the variety of divisions focus on it. So on the radar really reflects what we're considering emerging issues of interest to planners and the public, and one of them being aging and livable communities. So when you go onto that site, you'll find a lot of resources in regards to bibliography, web links, websites to give you, if you need to make a case to your community in regards to the impact of your aging population, this is a good place to start. The third tool is the Aging and Community Policy Guide. And the Aging and Community Policy Guide, as you know, the American Planning Association has a whole listing of policy guides to help provide a framework for the organization on the national and on the state and chapter level in terms of these issues that arise in the community, and what exactly is the position that the American Planning Association has. So in the Aging Community Policy Guide, which was just adopted a couple years ago, a year ago, it addresses six areas of community engagement, housing, transportation, land use, economic well-being, community assets, and supports. And so the guiding policies are ensuring a range of affordable housing options, taking a look also at having quality transportation options, safe, well-lighted, maximizing the connections with land use, taking a look at ensuring that land use and zoning tools create more welcoming communities, taking a look at supporting the economic well-being of older adults and their caregivers, because as we know, there has been also a need for home caregiving. And lastly, taking a look at community assets and the supports for older adults, responding to the aging needs of seniors, and also taking advantage of their contributions. So when we take a look at housing, we're taking a look at some of the resources that are out in the community, what kind of federal funding for low-income housing, rental housing that's out there, and making sure that that is maintained and that is budgeted. Other tools would be the low-income housing tax credit, CDBG with HUD, and Home with HUD, and the National Housing Trust Fund, that there's always housing choice, that there are a number of different options addressing the whole lifespan of an individual, that housing is both affordable and inclusive, taking a look at visitability, universal and enabling design, and utilization of vacant land, perhaps to utilize for senior housing, and also ensuring that the federally assisted housing programs are in place. So the last in the APA toolkit is a PAS report on planning aging supportive communities that Brad is going to talk about. And what is good about that is that it provides another footstool in regards to the availability of what's out there, and so communities can make their choices and customize strategies and solutions, reach out to people who, as we all say, are evidence-based, who are on the ground, like Alyssa will talk about what's happening in Connecticut, and learn from them and be able to create a program just for their community, taking into consideration the uniqueness of what's happening in regards to their own particular demographics, their own financial situation, and that is really the final part or component of our APA toolkit. So what I want to do now is just introduce the next presenters. Brad is our co-author of the PS report, and he also has created a consultancy firm called Planning and Aging, and he is available to work with communities in regard to helping them customize and develop their own strategy for addressing an aging demographic. And then our closing hitter speaker is Alyssa Norwood, who's the project manager for Connecticut's Legislative Commission on Aging, and she's going to share a fantastic, I like to call it a best practice, but it's really inspiring, of what one community has done to address an aging population. So with that, I will transfer the microphone over to Brad. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Let me do all of the technical things necessary to get my screen up and running. I hope you can all see my screen at this point. If not, I'm sure somebody will tell me. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be part of this. I've got about 20 minutes or so to talk about a rather dense 100-page document, so you may want to fasten your seat belts and return your seats and tray tables to their full and upright position, because I'm going to shoot through it rather quickly, and I apologize for that. There'll be some very dense slides. So anyway, thank you, Ramona, for the context. You also did a marvelous job of linking our PAS to the previous work. I was part of the task force that developed the policy guide that Ramona just spoke of. So there is a lot of consistency and connectivity between those two documents. And I'm delighted that APA commissioned my co-author, Marty Jaffe, and I to be to write the PAS, which was the first PAS that APA has done on this topic since the 1998 document that Ramona referenced, which is still an outstanding work. Just a little bit about me. I won't read all of this, but my perspective comes from the private sector doing a variety of plans. I've also been an adjunct professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago, College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs, where I was asked to, and I've developed and have taught now for several years, a course on planning communities for the aging population. But I also have been actively involved with the Aging Network in the community, and the last bullet point references an exciting new initiative that I and a couple of like-minded colleagues in the metropolitan Chicago region have established, which is the Lifetime Communities Collaborative. And when people ask the obvious question, what does that mean? I give them the formula, livable times time equals lifetime. So livable community that works throughout as one's needs evolve over time is truly a lifetime community. So when I start talking about this issue with people, public, private sector, regardless, I get a lot of questions. I wanted to synthesize a couple of the common questions. The key points here is that I don't want any community, I don't want anyone on the call to feel that this is not an issue for them. And also, it's not just for asset-rich communities, and frankly, there's multiple doors to start addressing this issue, and I will hypothesize and offer the point that you're already doing some planning for the older adult population, whether or not you recognize it. So when people say, well, isn't planning aging supportive communities just simple good planning practices? I say in many ways yes, but taking the older adult lens may add some very specific sensitivity as you do so. Second question is answering the zero-sum game. You know, if we plan for older adults, isn't this just shifting resources away from younger people or others? And my response is no. If you plan wisely, what you plan that will benefit older adults will have multiple benefits for a variety of different stakeholders. Planning for older adults should not be thought of planning exclusively for older adults. That's generally going to be politically a non-starter in many communities. The third question is similar to two, that if we dedicate resources, will that reduce the resources? And again, I say no. Take a win-win perspective. Most discretionary funds can benefit multiple stakeholders. In addition, there are some specific funds that the older adult programs can bring to the aggregate resource box, as well as their discretionary funds that other groups can bring in. And the last question may be controversial to some. When people say, well, aren't we already planning for older adults? I say communities are doing that, although you may not be doing that specifically, mindfully saying we're doing planning for older adults. You may already be doing it either, mindfully, or perhaps, isn't really front of mind, but as part of complete streets planning, you may be doing some of your open space planning, some of the human service transportation planning that may be going on in your region or in your state, transit-oriented development planning, affordable housing planning, lots of different planning that's going on. I think all of it can be seen as and should be thought of as also planning for older adults. Okay, let's go through the PAS report. Ramona already said, she referred to it as a primer. I certainly hope it helps serve as a call to action. We're trying to be strategic and a strategic guide to foster interdisciplinary approaches. As Ramona indicated, we try to highlight some promising practices and good examples and resources. By no means is it an exhaustive list. If it was an exhaustive list, certainly Alyssa's program in Connecticut would be featured and highlighted as well. And we also offer some strategic recommendations so that everybody, regardless of where your community is today, we hope should be able to find something to build upon moving forward. That's the real goal. It is organized in 6 chapters. I don't have to read them to you. There's some of the logical, planning, context, housing, mobility, public realm, public service. Chapter 5 is on different programs and processes, and 6 synthesizes recommendations, and then we're followed with appendices and references. So very quickly about each chapter, some of the key points in the planning context chapter, I give a brief synthesis of some of the high-level demographics, statistics, make some reference to the terminology that we employ, talk about some of the key concepts, and really try to introduce the readers, who I presume will primarily be from the planning world. I'm trying to introduce those of you in the planning world who may not be familiar with the Aging Network to the Aging Network. When I present, if I'm presenting to planners, I ask people if one of the things they can do as a follow-up to my presentation, find out who's in the Aging Network in their area, and if they don't know them already, give them a phone call and say, we need to go get coffee because we're working on the same thing, but we're maybe pulling at different ends of the rope. I also talk about some paradigm shifts consistent with what Mona was saying, some of the ones that I think very specifically are affecting aging in America, that older adults should be and are increasingly being seen as civic assets rather than simply their liabilities. It's not a needs-based conversation exclusively, or historically it was more so. At the federal level and certainly down through the states and localities, there's an increasing conflation of aging and disabilities issues in planning. One of the biggest shifts, and this is certainly prominent in healthcare conversations, is the paradigm shift of what had previously been an institutional-based care system, now transitioning to a home and community-based service system, which has lots of ramifications and frankly is pregnant with a lot of potential. I also think that in a number of ways, transportation paradigms are shifting so that increasingly conversations are focusing on access, multimodal connectivity, rather than simply efficiency and through flow and things like that. And aging in community, which I greatly prefer rather than the concept of aging in place, is all about providing appropriate and affordable housing options, including non-traditional or generational ones, throughout all communities. And we very consciously, as we did in the policy guide, chose the phrase aging in community so that it's a community-based discussion rather than putting the entire burden on the individuals, and if that person has caretakers, to come up with solutions on their own. It should not be forced upon older adults to figure out on their own. We also take a lifetime livable community approach, which leverages overlapping and shared interests of older adults and younger people so that we find joint wins. And we also make reference to some of the shifting roles, certainly some of the financial realities changing, and more public-private partnerships being a critical part of the planning context. What do we talk about in housing? If nothing else, the key word on this screen is the word options. There need to be options. I've sat in front of mayors and leaders of communities and asked them, who amongst you can honestly say that no older adult who's loved this community for decades has not been forced to leave because they could not find appropriate housing and affordable housing within the community that meets their current evolving needs? That's the critical question. So we give some background, some statistics. We, highlight some of the proactive housing assessments and plans that can help you build the case and understand the context. We talk about the criticality of linking housing and human services and healthcare. We talk about some of the programs for affordability and assistance. We talked about subsidized housing, which, as probably everybody in the calls knows, we do not have enough subsidized housing in this country for all the people who would qualify for it and would benefit from it. We give a little bit of conversation of accessibility, visibility, and universal design, some of the differences between them and how they can be implemented at a local or a regional or a state level. We also try to shine a little bit of a spotlight on some of the more creative and flexible housing considerations for older adults. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with ADUs, but also there's a lot of conversation these days about perhaps smaller homes, pocket neighborhoods, smaller lots, more creative multi or intergenerational approaches. How might adaptive reuse be used in your community with some of the potential structures that may not be currently at their highest and best use? How might they be part of the community-based solution to housing options? The notion of co-housing, older adult or intergenerational. Similarly, how should your transit accessible or your mixed-use zoning and planning also be thought of as an arrow in the quiver of providing good housing options to support aging in community? And really, it's important to develop an inclusive mindset to try to provide housing throughout the community, to try to minimize the major shifts of people from one place to another. Let people age where they're comfortable and where they've developed social capital for the years they've been in the community. We talk about mobility options, and in this case, we give a lot of, we kind of synthesize some of the research findings and implications. We talk about some older adults who are still driving, what are some of the key considerations for them. We also talk about some of the land use and roadway and parking lot design considerations that should be taken. We talk about pedestrianism and some of the key concerns and planning considerations with that. Likewise, with transit, we talk about the notion of mobility management. How do you train and publicize and try to make what transportation resources you have in your municipality benefit and workable for older adults. We talk about cyclists, but really the key conversation with mobility options is around developing a well-connected and accessible community transportation network. Don't force people to be isolated and or fend for themselves. Chapter 4, we talk about the public realm and public services. There we discuss things such as the integration between planning considerations and public health. There's a lot of things being done with a lot of physical planning implications within the public health world. Let's try to integrate them. Health impact assessments, some of you may be using them already, is a wonderful tool that's increasingly being used to try to integrate the worlds of public health and planning. We talk about the importance of parks and open spaces for community health, as well as making it a good aging supportive community, the importance of third places for gathering, maintaining social capital, combating isolation. I've spoken before. Let's try to creatively think through the use of public facilities and spaces, the gymnasia, the schools, the community centers in the community. Let's constantly think of, are they adequately serving the needs of all aspects of the community, including the older adults and the aging supportiveness of the community. We talked a little bit about disaster readiness and resiliency, as certainly older adults are often more vulnerable and are typically more victimized by any sort of disaster within a community. And we also have a little conversation about the use of the different technologies and how data and technology and big data can be used, and show a few examples to help support aging in community. Chapter 5 talks about the existing programs. There's some formally structured programs, some funder or program specific, some grassroots community-based programs at all sorts of geographic scales, and I developed a bit of a typology and tried to do a little kind of sifting and sorting amongst the programs. we talk a little bit about the myriad of assessment tools and some of the value and some of the limitations of tools and indices and rankings. And I also try to synthesize some of the key lessons learned, that critical lessons are the need for local commitment in leadership and funding. It's got to be a locally supported. Don't just buy in something from a distance and think if it's, comes from elsewhere, it'll obviously work for you. Visible, open, broad-based, flexible, multi-sectoral coalitions are also important. Those of you who are finding some success in this work, I suspect, know that that is true. And those of you who are just contemplating or kicking off an effort, I can't emphasize largely enough to bring in a broad coalition. Don't just work with the people you are accustomed to working with. Like in any good plan, think about and highlight implementation strategies and early successes, and welcome them and publicize them. Build your own success. And again, develop location-specific and location-sensitive approaches and programs. What works well elsewhere is a great guide, but generally you're not going to adopt anything whole cloth. Final recommendations, we divided into some specific, which were general, strategic, or process-oriented, and then there's some specific to projects or programs. And we talked a little bit about next steps. And each of you can answer these questions in front of you. What components are already in place and what are missing? Are there ongoing efforts underway? You just took a poll to that effect. Are all of the key stakeholders already involved? And can existing agendas and initiatives be broadened or tweaked to also include aging supporting this? And again, no one community approach or program fits all communities, even the well-publicized ones. Thank you. I apologize again for breaking every rule I have as a presenter or as an educator on overly wordy slides. I'm happy to follow up with any of you, and feel free to reach out to me at the contact information there. And I would be remiss if I did not offer my final words, go Cubs. And with that, I am going to send it over to Elisa. Give me just a moment. Elisa, it's all yours.
Wonderful, Brad. Thank you so much, and thank you all for signing on to today's webinar. Connecticut, as you've heard from both Ramona and Brad, has been hard at work to actualize many of the principles that you just heard described. But before I jump into our Livable Communities initiative, a little bit about who we are. We are the Connecticut Legislative Commission on Aging, and we are a nonpartisan public policy and research office of the Connecticut General Assembly, the legislative branch here in Connecticut. Our offices are housed in the state capitol, and you can see us down below. On the bottom left, we're a small but mighty staff of 4. I am the second person over from the left, Alyssa Norwood, and I'm project manager here at Connecticut's Legislative Commission on Aging. And I'm flanked on my right by Julia Evans-Starr, our executive director. And then on the left side of the screen is Christy Koval, our communications manager. And on the far right, Deb McNault, our senior policy analyst. And our mission here in state government is to improve the quality of life for the older adults of today and tomorrow. We do take the latter half of that charge very seriously, and as you'll hear when I speak about our Livable Communities work, we're very intentional in embracing a lifespan approach and not making our program just about the needs of older adults. We sit among 6 legislative policy commissions, and we are governed by a 21-member volunteer board with members from across the state of Connecticut. Learn more about our work more broadly at our website, which is www.coa.cga.ct.gov. And if you look down toward the bottom middle of the screen, you'll see there's a tab about our Livable Communities work, which takes you to our Livable Communities portal. And you can also access it by clicking on the Major Initiatives tab at the top of the screen. What is our Livable Communities Initiative? So we were legislatively empowered back in 2013 to spearhead this work for a variety of reasons. Brad touched on some of them. The specific historical context to our commission and to Connecticut is, like in many places across the country, there's a historic movement happening in the realm of social services around people who've conventionally been receiving their care in institutional settings, instead returning to a home and community-based environment. And as that happens, and as demographic trends continue to shift, we started hearing from our communities that there was a lack of community readiness to embrace a population that increasingly wants to age in place and age in community. So this initiative was an actualization of that realization, and Connecticut, like other states across the country and also around the globe, is aging. Some specific information about Connecticut: we're the 7th oldest state in the nation based on median age, and we have an average life expectancy of almost 81 years for someone born in Connecticut today, which is makes us the 3rd longest lived state in the nation. So there's a lot to celebrate there and a lot of opportunity, but of course a realization that this significant demographic transformation is permanent, it's unprecedented, and it requires us now in a very proactive way to be thoughtful about how we create places that can support that significantly changed demographic in a way that's very intentional as opposed to incidental. So thus our Livable Communities initiative was born. It embraces, as both Brad and Ramona said, a lot of the existing relevant planning paradigms, but again, it's very important to us that there's an intentionality in the process and that the benefits aren't just incidental. This work embodies multiple different areas. As you can see on your screen, there are many different ways to conceive of this work. We conceptualize it around 7 different domains, which are highly interrelated. And we build in Connecticut on the strengths of many, many partners who have been doing this work for decades. And we view our role very much as a convener, a facilitator, and a connector between initiatives and helping identify points of collaboration as well as synergy. With respect to our values, let's list them here. And there are certain words you've seen throughout this presentation repeating, so I'll draw your eyes first to the word choice. This initiative is about choice and respecting and honoring the independence and dignity of folks really across the lifespan. And no community should fail in the effort to make sure that there are adequate choices in all realms for people who want to stay connected to the places that they've perhaps spent their whole life. So housing choice, you've heard a great deal about that already, is paramount. Connecticut has 70% of its housing stock as single-family homes. Many of our bedrooms are on the 2nd floor. Doorways aren't sufficiently wide. So Connecticut is ripe with potential to grow and diversify its housing stock to honor that choice so that every Connecticut resident that wants to age in community can do so. We also have focused a lot of our attention recently on transportation, as I'm sure many of you have in your planning efforts, in making sure that a car-dominated country increasingly turns its attention to making sure that all modes of transit are supported. So what are some specific examples in Connecticut of livability where we've actualized some of the principles that you've been hearing about? Again, speaking of synergy between work that you've all been doing for a long time, this notion of complete streets certainly benefits people across the lifespan. And specifically, this is a photo and also a rendering by its side of downtown New Britain. And New Britain is a small city about 9 miles southwest of Hartford, which is, of course, Connecticut's capital. And recently, Connecticut opened the first bus rapid transit line in the state. It's called CT Fast Track. It's been wildly successful. It was first conceived of to alleviate congestion on Interstate 84, which is a major highway which connects major metropolitan areas throughout the Northeast. And it serves the greater Hartford area, which has a population well in excess of 1 million people. And New Britain is the terminus of this busway, and they were quite proactive in seeing the opportunity that comes with being the terminus of a busway, and decided to leverage the opportunity of having this increased activity and influx in their downtown and to try to improve things even more. So you can see on the left the existing downtown, on the right simply one rendering that helps promote complete streets. The connections are probably obvious, but complete streets not only make the sidewalks safer for all users, pedestrians using all manner of mobility device, but it also supports cycling. And the Connecticut Legislative Commission on Aging recently conducted a study and found that the fastest growing segment of cyclists are actually older adults. So it serves them both directly and indirectly. You can see on the bottom left, we identify this as something important in the realm of transportation. Again, in the realm of thinking about connecting different initiatives, bringing together different partners and breaking down silos, complete streets really create something much bigger than simply what you would see facially. What you're really doing when you're completing streets is valuing community as much as mobility. So you're creating places for community engagement. You're promoting health by increasing walkability and touching all of these other realms as well. A recent success in Connecticut is Connecticut. We have, we advanced a little too. We have Rocky Corner, which has just recently broken ground and is Connecticut's first co-housing development. You all are probably well familiar with the concept of co-housing, but I think one of the big struggles with respect to co-housing around the country is ensuring not just that you have it exist in a town, but that you have an affordable component. So Rocky Corner will have 30 homes, 13 of which are affordable. And the criteria is based on percentages of certain area median income. And this co-housing project embraces many of the principles that co-housing developments across the country embrace. It has a low impact design, it has a common house, it's accessible, and ideally it's multi-generational. And I would challenge those of you that have co-housing in your state, and really any program, to go one step beyond multi-generational, which is the coexistence of generations, to try to embed in that housing or whatever the project or policy is, the notion of it being intergenerational and working to connect generations. We also touched a little bit earlier on universal design features. So just for review's sake, universal design features encompass the principle that a home can more readily support somebody regardless of their functional ability if certain aspects are embedded in the design, such as wider doorways, lower light switches, and other features that can support an individual regardless of where they are in the continuum of age or functionality. And we're proud to share that our Legislative Commission on Aging really tries to impact change at a systems and at a policy level, and we've been working with our State Department of Housing around the issue of universal design features, and just last week the new criteria were released around competitive housing assistance for multifamily properties, or CHAMP funding, and going forward it will be a requirement for any developer applying for those funds to make sure that at least one unit in that development has universal design features. So it's a step in the right direction. Ultimately, we'd like to see all new construction encompass universal design features. It's a relatively low-cost upfront investment to ensure that whoever enters that property can stay there if they so choose for the entirety of the life cycle. And finally, a piece of legislation that we're proud of, which is codified in the Connecticut General Statutes. You can see the statutory reference there. Like most places, each of our localities, here in Connecticut, it's at least once every 10 years, is required to produce what in our state is called a local plan of conservation and development. And now, per state statute, it's required that towns at least give consideration explicitly in their plans to what they might do with respect to allowing older adults as well as persons with disability to remain in their homes and communities whenever possible. So again, embracing this notion of intentionality rather than incidentality. Finally, what's some of the data around all of this? And we found in Connecticut that there was some data, but we wanted more. And on the wings of the success, really, of National American Planning Association, we conducted a survey here in Connecticut. For those of you who are interested in the national survey, it's called Investing in Place. It was conducted by APA last year. And using the exact same survey instrument, we conducted a statewide survey here in Connecticut of over 1,000 residents, really trying to get at what it is that people want and how communities can best prepare to support their residents across the lifespan. So we've opted to release the findings as a series of topically specific reports. They're available on our website, and we've released 2 thus far, one back in May and the other just last week. So our transportation policy brief asks the question, how can we best support residents across the lifespan? You can delve deeper into the data on your own, but really I think the key message to emerge from that brief is that older adults more than ever are looking for non-car mobility options and are really looking for their communities to be proactive in supporting choice for those older adults who are seeking to live a lifestyle that's less car-centric. And the good news is there's synergy here and alignment, because most age segments are interested in seeing their communities do the same thing. And finally, with respect to housing, I would say the key theme to emerge from our housing report, again related to transportation, is that people, 1, are really seeking more affordability in their communities, and 2, are looking for high walkability. What resources does our Commission on Aging have to support these transformations? And is we've really tried to empower our localities to be the drivers. No 2 towns are alike, and we see ourselves as providing a menu of opportunity and resources, but really each town is best situated to figure out where it wants to place its emphasis and its effort. So we've created this guide for municipal leaders to, 1, get the conversation started and for people to really understand how significant these demographic changes are. And inside that guide, this is one of many products. This is among others. They're listed on our website of different tools that communities can use to conduct an assessment to see where you are, what are your strengths, where are the opportunities, and where are the areas where you'd like to build and do some additional work. Again, we've arranged it around our 7 domains, which broadly fall under 2 categories, the physical environment and the social environment, and they're all deeply interconnected to one another. In addition, there's always a conversation around funding. How do I support this effort? Where's the money? And as you've already heard from Ramona and from Brad, there's no magic livable communities funding, but the great news is there's a lot of synergy and opportunity to leverage funds across each of the domains, housing, transportation, and it's all about thinking differently with the funds that you have. And if you get nothing else out of this webinar, to walk away with this notion that there should be a real intentionality around embedding a lifespan approach in all of your practices, your policies, and as well as your spending. Something else that we've tried to do is to inspire a bit of healthy competition between our towns. And on our website, we're mapping ideas and innovations that are happening across the state, as well as that are happening across the country. So as we hear about towns that undertake an innovative program or policy in any one of the areas that we've talked about, we map it with the idea that not only do neighboring towns get inspired, but also that there's a sharing of resources and that there's an opportunity for folks not to reinvent the wheel, but borrow best practices from other communities in Connecticut. And finally, I close with this slide. This is a beautiful photo series that was developed by photographer Tom Husey, and there are several. You can probably find them online, and they are generated through computer magic. This older woman who's looking in the mirror is in fact looking at a younger version of herself in actuality that's been photoshopped or otherwise manipulated into the slide. But I think it's an important reminder. We like to say here at the Commission on Aging that age is just a number. And this is our collective journey, and the essence of who we are remains unchanged throughout our life course. We want others to see us as we see ourselves, and I hope that we undertake the collective responsibility of nurturing that essence with dignity, with independence, with connectivity and purpose, and really planning and zoning is at the epicenter of this effort. And there's a tremendous opportunity here for each of you in your policies, in your local plans, and in the way you think about planning and zoning to create places that can really honor that journey. With that, I thank you. If you have further questions about our efforts here in Connecticut, we're always looking to listen and learn from our colleagues in this work across the country and around the world. So please feel free to contact us. And at this point, I believe we'll open the floor to questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. We do have some questions, so I'll get those started. But as a reminder, for anyone who does have questions, to type those in the questions box located on the right-hand side of your toolbar. And be sure to indicate who you'd like to be answering the question, who the question's for. Okay, let's start with Ramona. Are there any considerations for the impacts of dementia on the older population and housing options? What happens when you have a couple and one develops dementia and the other does not? Often couples are forced to separate because of different needs. So is there any consideration for the impacts of dementia? So we'll start with Ramona, and if anyone else wants to jump in, please feel free.
You know, that's really an amazing question, because locally here in Hawaii, we actually have had 2 cases addressing that, where couples were separated for similar, and they took their they took their case to court. They tried to, you know, and finally I think it was either legislated or, so it really depends on the infrastructure in regard to the political environment of your community, number one, and who makes that type of decision. Sometimes it's with the institution, sometimes if it's sponsored by some government, you know, funding, then, you know, so I think one of the key things is that that's obviously an issue that's only going to increase, and that's something that should be incorporated in the thinking. And the other thing is I'm seeing more of the initiatives that are bringing healthcare and housing together more than ever. And I think that it's almost like we're at the beginning of those stages where we start to take a look at food security or food insecurity and planning and transportation and land use. And so that's where we are now. So I am very hopeful that the number one, planners will start incorporating that, and number two, as the conversation and the partnerships between healthcare and housing come together, that will open more of this type of rethinking of existing patterns and barriers.
If I can jump in just on that question, Chris, I think consistent with what Ramona has said, it really points to making it a broad conversation, and really points to the importance of bringing in caregivers to the conversation. Very unfortunately, this is an example of where people are left isolated on their own to try to address these issues. I know from painful personal experience with my late parents how difficult it is, and how important it is to look at these things at a broader community level, and how can the community support the needs of its population. Many of the current practices here, even in some of the, you know, kind of exemplary continuous care communities where people can live there and have different elements of one campus address their needs as they evolve. Often there'll be a cognitive care wing, but even in those facilities in the States, oftentimes the focus is on building security hardware and, you know, making sure that people don't get out of doors they shouldn't be getting out of, and, be flight risks or get lost, whereas I think Europe is way ahead of us in really thinking cognitive care and dementia care as kind of a community planning and design consideration.
Brad, to that end, this is Alyssa Norwood. To build on your comment about Europe being really progressive, the United States is really just beginning to see this, but there's a model of dementia care that takes a parcel of property and will create a town, really, that's almost a fiction of sorts, but really empowers older adults with dementia and those across the lifespan with dementia. There'll be a grocery store, a restaurant, a theater, housing, and there'll be an opportunity for individuals to roam freely within that environment, which in reality is a safe environment, a closed environment where someone might wander through a grocery store repeatedly and engage in the activity of shopping because it's comfortable, when in reality the staff of the store are all trained specialists who support those with dementia in their care. And then integrated into that model, you might have those without dementia, students, affordable housing units, a whole realm of individuals be housed within this community and receive affordable housing. So there's a lot of creative thinking happening around dementia as more and more older adults are diagnosed with dementia. And I also want to highlight the work of Minnesota is a real leader in this area with their dementia-friendly communities effort.
Great, thanks everybody. We'll circle back again and start with Ramona. Is there a metric or set of metrics that measure what it means to age successfully?
So I think that there have been a number of different organizations that have developed indicators, like AARP has developed a set of indicators that can be used to, so it's like when AARP introduced their livability index at the annual conference this year. I mean, that would be a real good platform to be able to incorporate some of the indicators that they are using to be able to describe what a livable community is and how livability and age-friendly are pretty much one and the same, because it addresses the issues of all ages if it addresses the issues of the most vulnerable, in this case the more fragile seniors and persons with disabilities. I hope that that responds in part to your question.
Can I jump in? I really feel I need to. I would just kind of admonish everyone on the call to be very, very careful and sensitive when we talk about things like successful aging or positive aging. One, for several reasons. One is that really kind of connotes that those who may not live up to whatever aspirational standards someone put in place as what connotes successful or positive aging, it tells people you're not being successful, which I don't think is the right message, and I think it establishes an us and them dichotomy, which I don't believe is particularly healthy in this conversation.
This is Alyssa Norwood, just to weigh in on the indicators conversation. So I echo Ramona's sentiment that AARP's Livability Index is a wonderful tool. It's comprised of 61 objective indicators that measure livability, things ranging from percent of folks in your town that are paying more than 30% of their income for housing and so on. In Connecticut, we view that as an important building block, and we've been working to go one step further. And we were involved in an international effort with World Health Organization. The city of New Haven applied to an RFP, and they were selected as one of 14 cities worldwide to pilot a World Health Organization guide around this idea of measuring livability or measuring age friendliness. So in complement with the objective data, what you also really need and is critically important is subjective data. So what do your community residents think? And the pairing of those two pieces of information is really key to starting a community conversation So by way of one example, there are all sorts of objective measures and metrics that can tell you how walkable your town is or not. Walk score is one common measure. But as a complement to that, you really need to ask your community residents, how walkable do you think your town is? And the pairing of that data can be powerful because you can have a highly walkable town, but if your community's perception is that it's not, that requires a different intervention than if you have a really rural community that has a low walkability score, but your residents are very comfortable being out and on the streets. So perception is a really critical piece to complement the objective data.
Great, thank you. And I'll interject at this point and remind folks that the Private Practice Division actually had a webcast back in June of this year on the AARP Livability Index, and I believe even there might have even been a speaker that was from AARP to talk about the index itself. And the title was New Context for Aging and Livable Communities, and it is up on our YouTube website. So feel free to take a look at it because the speakers do go through that livability index online and talk about some of those key features. Okay, let's move on. All right. This, I'm just going to put this out for anyone. Question concerning developers building new residential mid-rise high density in a neighborhood. Affordable housing is part of the conversation, but I have not heard anyone go beyond income into apartments that utilize universal design. I had an aha moment just now. How do I, a concerned citizen, approach the subject of baby boomer future living choices to my city council, committee, or board members to make sure that this is a conversation brought up between city planners and developers?
I can jump on that as, kind of take a first crack. One, many times, as I know probably many people on the call, recognize, there's a lot of give and take in these conversations, whether they're planned unit developments that get negotiated on a site-specific basis, but wherever there's a desire for any sort of zoning relief, that'll often open the door for discussions which, as the questioner asks, often start with affordability considerations, but there's a lot of things. There's setbacks, there's parking, there's open space, there's amenity conversations. Absolutely bring into the conversation universal design, bring in visitability. I think that all of that can and should be seen as another tool in the planner's toolkit in conversation with developers to try to reach the community goal of an aging supportive community. So I think absolutely that should be brought into the conversation, and you have a great mechanism when there's any petition for some sort of relief.
This is Alyssa Norwood. I would echo Brad's sentiments, and there's an entire field recognizing the importance of being able to make sure that the individual home environment supports the aging and journey. There's now a designation called Aging in Place Specialist for those that come in and can provide assessments of your home and renovate them. And for places with older housing stock, they serve an extremely important role. But I think there's a real missed opportunity with any existing renovation or any new construction, certainly, not to make universal design features part of the conversation. And I think really it's an economic argument. It's much, much less expensive to incorporate all of those features up front than it is to try to retrofit a unit. So to the extent that we're all in a challenged fiscal climate and we can keep people that suddenly have emerging functional impairments in a place that they have strong social supports and are comfortable and connected, it would be foolhardy to do anything except make this part of the conversation.
And in some of the early conversations in some municipalities that were putting in place visibility codes, universal design codes as requirements, I think that some of the early feedback was that the resistance from the development community or from the builders was often mitigated over time by the recognition of what Alicia says, that, adding the cost up front was a rather incremental cost if done mindfully in the planning stage, and that generally it was not a significant component in the value or the marketability or the resale potential for those properties.
And this is Ramona. Let me add my little 5 cents. On the National Association of Home Builders, I would go to their website because they do have a component that's really addressing that also. I know that our local affiliate has a program to train, as Alyssa talked about, aging in place specialists. So, I mean, that kind of mindset and by having the whole credibility in regard to the National Association of Home Builders behind it, I think would be very supportive.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, the next question. This question is for Alyssa. How does Connecticut's initiative address the special needs of aging LGBT adults? Are there good examples in Connecticut or elsewhere of planning specifically for this group?
That's a great question. There is a relatively new group in Connecticut called LGBT Aging Advocacy, and their mission and their charge is to create an open and affirming aging services environment in Connecticut. For those who aren't familiar or haven't been thoughtful about this population, this is a population that came of age in a very different social climate than the one that they're in now, and they're very accustomed to a life of hiding who they are and are terrified about what it means for them to enter the aging services realm where they don't necessarily know that they feel comfortable, and there are huge issues of trust. So aging in place and aging in community is particularly important for these folks. They're also much less likely as a population to have the social supports that members of the general population might have. They're less likely to have children and so on and so forth. They might instead cultivate a family of choice. So we're very mindful to the needs of this population, but at the same time we also want to make sure that there's this duality, that we balance the need to lift up and make people aware of these issues, but from a planning and zoning perspective, people are people, and we're very intentional, respectfully intentional in Connecticut about not having used the phrases age-friendly or dementia-friendly as other folks have chosen to, because we really want to, again, embrace and honor this notion that we're all on a collective journey and we want to plan for people. So housing is housing for everyone, and we really support and lift up this idea of everyone engaged in community on equal footing. So to the extent that we are planning for LGBT older adults, I think we're certainly raising visibility to the unique needs of that population, but holding that gently in balance with the need to honor the fact that we're all on this collective journey together, and in that sense everyone's housing, transportation, planning and zoning and livability needs are very much the same.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Brad. Brad, do you have strategies to address the shut-ins who have limited interactions with their neighbors due to physical limitations or mental issues? Also, their vulnerability to financial scams.
I would say that, great question. I would say that with respect to financial scams, there's a substantial effort throughout the country, and you should probably, if you're not already in touch with the Area Agency on Aging that covers your locality, you should go to them as perhaps your first resource, because I know certainly in the metropolitan Chicago area, and I serve on the board of one of the area agencies on aging, there's a broad statewide coalition on elder justice and financial scams. And if whoever asked the call has, frustration, or asked the question, has frustration on this issue, you can follow up with me and I can connect you with some local resources here that might, help, strategize and answer for dealing with the financial scam part of the question. The first part of the question was on shut-ins or isolated. Couple of thoughts. One is, and that's partly what we try to touch upon in our public services and public realm chapter in the document that there's different roles. There are eyes and ears throughout communities that may be the kind of the first contacts with a lot of these isolated and shut-in individuals. Some of them may be, public employees, but some of them could be, your postal worker. They could be your delivery communities that see people that recognize if something looks amiss. It could be your utility meter reader types. So there are programs. There's a program in the Chicago area where a lot of these kind of informal community eyes and ears types of people have gotten some training in how to see if there are some evident issues and try to make people not quite so isolated. There's also there's some technology advancements that come to play here. There's another program through a couple of organizations here locally that I'm familiar with. It's called the Virtual Senior Center, where some folks who are, economically challenged are being provided with technology that allows them to, get some training and link into certain services. Kind of if you can't get there in person, here's how you can engage with some of the things through your local aging network and your local senior center. But also part of it goes to caregiving and kind of addressing the needs and including caregivers. But again, I'd also back it up and say part of that should just be part of the broad community conversation. Maybe some of the decisions that we make now and in the next, the next couple of years will mitigate the extent to which people are isolated in our communities in the future, so that perhaps it's a combination of addressing those who are shut in now and trying to reduce the number of people living in isolation in the future through thoughtful planning today.
Great, thanks. Next one is for Alyssa. Can you please elaborate on how co-housing projects work in general and how this model can be inclusive and how co-housing can work using existing housing stock?
Sure. So the co-housing movement is not a new one, but I think it's taken on a lot of momentum within the past decade. And the notion of co-housing is that unlike a commune, for those of you who are hippie children might be familiar with that concept, co-housing, all of the units are individually owned. They tend to be fairly densely located, but what makes co-housing unique is, one, there's a real intentionality around creating community, and two, there are also common structures on the property. So really co-housing in a sense is trying to intentionally recreate, I think, what the fabric of American neighborhoods once were and somewhat happened organically, and we've lost that for a variety of social reasons. But those who buy into a co-housing community do so with the expectation that there's an interest in creating mutual support systems. There's this sense of wanting to be part of a larger community, and again, that notion of choice again. There's this duality where people can have the privacy that they want in their individually owned units. People have their own kitchens, but at the same time, there is a communal dining area, communal kitchen, and an expectation that with some regularity, people cook meals communally, they eat communally. The individual features of co-housing vary vastly across the country, but a community garden might be a component. There's certainly this notion that many of us in our single-family homes have a lot of duplicative objects in our lives that could be shared. So there might be one shed on a co-housing property with a handful of lawnmowers and gardening tools instead of each person individually owning one. Parking tends to be on the periphery, so these tend to be highly walkable environments. And again, with respect to that lifespan approach, they're desirable really across the lifespan. They're attractive to older adults for a variety of reasons: the walkability, the sense of community, lack of social isolation. Parents with young children might be attracted to these communities because there are safe spaces for children to run freely. And with respect to leveraging existing properties, there's been a lot of innovative thinking. If you have existing housing stock in a neighborhood, could you perhaps retrofit a neighborhood to embrace this idea of co-housing? And there have been some places across the United States that have built these communal structures within an existing neighborhood. So there's this whole area is ripe with opportunity for potential to try to reinvigorate some of the social connectivity that's so important to all of us, but particularly for an older adult population that might be isolated.
If I can throw in a couple of other thoughts on this, we highlight one exciting project in downtown Silver Spring, Maryland, in our document, where adaptive reuse of derelict structures. In this case, it was a 40-year-old 4-story office building that was redeveloped as a co-housing model. And I think that probably everybody on the call, or many people on the call, may have in mind some problem project. Is it a derelict retail facility or a shopping center or a Class C office building somewhere? So the notion of this is also an opportunity that should be thought of in the redevelopment strategies, the adaptive reuse planning. It's another non-traditional approach.
Okay, thank you. This next question is for all three of you, and it's more of a recap. Throughout several questions, there have been some best practices discussed. But if any of you could just shout out examples of planning and zoning departments that really have collaborated with area agencies on aging in successful initiatives, just so that folks can get more information and read up on those as best practices.
This is Alyssa Norwood. I would point to the Atlanta Regional Commission as one first example on the national stage that comes to mind that's been a real leader in that area.
I agree. This is Ramona. They've done an outstanding job, and on that listing that I had in terms of some of the new paradigms, that really is one of the, in fact, I think we featured them on one of the webinars or at a session at the APA National Conference. So they're outstanding.
I would say that there's numerous other ones. The folks in Portland, Oregon, working on Age-Friendly Portland, have been at it probably longer than anyone else in the country in terms of integrating a lot of different sectors in some of their city and regional planning work. The folks in Kansas City Communities for All Ages, which is also happens to have the aspect of being a bi-state effort, does a lot of work that deals with suburbs as well as the metropolitan area as a whole. And there's a bunch of sort of less traditional programs in smaller communities as well. Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, Burlington, Vermont have some long-standing programs in place. So there are a lot of them. There's the good news is that there's more every year.
That is good news. And one other, I'm a fan of the New York City Age-Friendly New York City. So I suggest also that for inspiration, go to their website, which is the New York Academy of Medicine. They're the nonprofit organization that manages the Age-Friendly New York City. But what I want to do is to share with you that on their website, they've got some really good, they know how to frame the questions well, and they have low cost, no cost ideas, which is what all communities and governments want. And they also have some information in regards to some of the partnerships that they've had with professional organizations and with libraries and with businesses, and they have checklists and how to make business friendly, and also an age-friendly neighborhood initiative that they had. So I would also throw that into the mix too.
Okay, well, with that, it's 2:30 Eastern Time, everyone, so we're going to go ahead and close up. So, as always, thank you, Ramona, with the Private Practice Division, for putting together a great session, and for our speakers, Ramona, Brad, and Alyssa, for joining us today and talking about this topic. Again, this session is worth 1.5 CM credits. Just hit up your dashboard on planning.org and filter through via the private practice division, and you'll get today's session listed there. And this is recorded, it will be put up on our YouTube channel in a few moments, and we will get a PDF up on our web page. So again, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.